We're talking about the business of the Beatles, and this to me is fascinating. When they break up, all right, and who knows who broke, everyone has a theory.
Paul McCartney has never been one to shy away from speaking his mind. But in his shocking 2025 interview, his fury erupted in a way few had ever seen before. He lashed out against what he called the most vile, immoral singers in Hollywood's history. His words weren't just casual criticisms, they carried the weight of decades of pain, betrayal, and disillusionment. McCartney described these figures as traitors, people who had shattered friendships, destroyed careers, and abused the very industry they once helped build. It was a raw confession, one that peeled back the curtain on the darker side of music history. The first name McCartney condemned was Jerry Lee Lewis, once a rock and roll idol. Lewis's image crumbled when he married his 13-year-old cousin, Myra Gale Brown, in 1958, for McCartney, who had admired Lewis as a pioneer of the genre. This wasn't just scandal, it was an unforgivable act of betrayal against everything music was supposed to stand for. Even more shocking was how the industry and the press looked the other way, allowing Lewis to continue performing as if nothing had happened. McCartney was appalled that money, fame, and power could excuse such vile behavior, leaving the young girl's pain and exploitation buried beneath applause. But Jerry Lee Lewis wasn't the only name to draw McCartney's wrath. Perhaps the deepest wound came from someone much closer, John Lennon. Once his soulmate in music, Lennon's words and actions during the Beatles' breakup cut McCartney to the core. When Paul announced his departure in 1970, Lennon mocked him publicly, dismissing his talent and claiming Paul lived only off the Beatles' legacy. To McCartney, this wasn't just banter, it was a knife to the heart from the very man he trusted most. Adding to the tension was Yoko Ono's constant presence in recording sessions, which left McCartney feeling like an outsider in his own band. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming. Lennon had chosen a new life, and in McCartney's eyes, he had abandoned not only their friendship, but the very foundation of the Beatles. And then there was Yoko herself. To Paul, Yoko Ono wasn't just Lennon's wife, she became a force that shattered the group from within. Her influence over Lennon was so strong that McCartney felt as though the band no longer had space for him. He later admitted that watching Yoko dismantle Lennon's family, friendships, and commitment to the Beatles left him with an anger he could never forgive. What hurt most wasn't just losing his band, but realizing that his closest bond had been hijacked by someone he saw as manipulative and destructive. For Paul, Yoko symbolized the painful truth that even the strongest partnerships could be torn apart by outside forces. Outside the Beatles' circle, McCartney's disdain extended to another rival, Mick Jagger. While the Rolling Stones and the Beatles were often compared, Paul remembered Jagger as arrogant, manipulative, and eager to tear others down for his own gain. Jagger openly declared that the Beatles were the past, crowning the Stones as the future of music. McCartney took this as not only disrespectful, but cruel, especially during the fragile period when the Beatles were unraveling. The rivalry wasn't just musical, it was personal. Jagger's constant jabs and public mockery left Paul convinced that his ego-driven behavior made him one of the vilest figures he ever encountered. The list didn't end there. Phil Spector, once hailed as a genius producer, became another source of McCartney's rage. While working on the Let It Be album, Spector's controlling behavior escalated to outright threats. McCartney recalled an incident where Spector pulled out a gun during an argument demanding compliance. Beyond creative clashes, Spector manipulated contracts, siphoned profits, and even made indirect threats against Paul's family. For McCartney, this was the ultimate betrayal. Not only was his art being hijacked, but his safety and peace of mind were stolen. What should have been a collaborative process turned into a nightmare, leaving scars that haunted him for years. But betrayal wasn't only about the industry, it also touched his personal friendships. McCartney never forgave Bobby Womack, who shocked him by marrying Barbara Cook, the widow of Sam Cooke, shortly after the singer's tragic death. To Paul, this wasn't just poor judgment, it was exploitation of grief. Womack showed no remorse, carrying on as if nothing was wrong. McCartney saw it as a violation of loyalty, dignity, and basic human decency. The music world once again looked away, brushing the scandal aside. For Paul, it was a devastating reminder that even supposed friends could act in ways so vile they left lifelong wounds. Even the king of rock and roll wasn't spared from McCartney's disappointment. Elvis Presley, once one of Paul's greatest idols, spiraled into self-destruction in his later years. Surrounded by drugs, alcohol, and endless excess, Elvis dragged those close to him into his chaos. McCartney mourned not just the man Elvis became, but the example he set for others, a cautionary tale of fame devouring its own. Watching his hero destroy himself was, for Paul, another reminder that legends weren't immune to ruin, and that greatness could be undone by weakness and addiction. Keith Richards, too, made McCartney's blacklist, his violent outbursts, reckless behavior, and endless indulgence in drugs and alcohol convinced Paul that Richards had crossed the line from troubled artist to dangerous figure. McCartney recalled hearing of incidents where Richards assaulted colleagues, caused accidents, and took no responsibility for the damage left behind. To Paul, Richards wasn't just reckless, he was selfish, careless, and indifferent to the pain he caused others. It was yet another disillusionment, another fallen idol in a long line of disappointments. Then came Frank Sinatra, the polished voice of America, the symbol of suave confidence, yet behind the glamour lay a shadowy connection to the mafia. FBI files and industry whispers revealed Sinatra's involvement in laundering money, coercing artists, and using mob ties to secure his dominance in entertainment. To McCartney, this was perhaps the most vile betrayal of all, proof that power in the music world often depended less on talent and more on manipulation. What good was a beautiful song? Paul wondered if it was backed by corruption. Finally, McCartney pointed to Tom Jones, a man whose powerful voice was rivaled only by his reputation as a womanizer. For Paul, who valued loyalty and respect, Jones's endless affairs, public scandals, and disregard for women were impossible to overlook. Stories of Jones pursuing married women, cheating on his wife, and flaunting his conquests left McCartney disgusted. Talent alone, Paul insisted, couldn't excuse such reckless disrespect. By the end of his confession, McCartney's anger wasn't just about individuals, it was about an entire system. The music industry, in his eyes, had allowed fame and money to excuse behavior that destroyed friendships, families, and careers. Jerry Lee Lewis, John Lennon, Yoko Ono, Mick Jagger, Phil Spector, Bobby Womack, Elvis Presley, Keith Richards, Frank Sinatra, Tom Jones, each name told a story of betrayal, arrogance, or corruption, and each one left McCartney with scars he carried throughout his life. So, were these legends truly deserving of the fame they enjoyed? Or had history turned a blind eye to their darkest sides? McCartney's words force us to reconsider the stars we once admired. Behind the music, the glamour, and the applause, there are stories of deception, manipulation, and destruction. Perhaps the greatest lesson Paul McCartney gives us isn't about music at all, it's about remembering that even legends can fall, and that the truth behind their fame is often far darker than the songs that made them shine.